Betrayed by my wife and daughter, I fought cancer alone. But my revenge was brutal and sweet. In the bustling metropolis of New York City, Alexander Blackwood had carved out an empire from nothing. His real estate ventures had transformed him from a humble entrepreneur into a multimillionaire, commanding respect and admiration from peers and rivals alike. At 55, Alexander had everything: a luxurious lifestyle, a beautiful wife, Elizabeth, and a daughter, Victoria. However, his world was about to be shattered by an unexpected and devastating diagnosis. Alexander sat in the sterile examination room of New York Presbyterian Hospital, his fingers tapping nervously against the metal armrest of his chair. The antiseptic smell filled his nostrils as he waited for Dr. Emily Hart to return with his test results. He had always been a man of control, but in this moment he felt utterly powerless. Dr. Hart entered the room, her expression carefully neutral. "Alexander, I have your results," she said, taking a seat across from him. She opened the manila folder, her eyes scanning the contents. The colonoscopy revealed a mass, and the subsequent biopsy confirmed our concerns. It's stage 3 colon cancer. Alexander absorbed the news with the same composure he maintained through countless high-stakes business negotiations. "What are we looking at in terms of survival rates?" he asked, his voice steady. Dr. Hart explained that with aggressive treatment, surgery followed by chemotherapy, the 5-year survival rate was around 60%. "But you're healthy otherwise, and we caught this before it spread to distant organs. I believe we have a good chance of beating this," she assured him. Alexander nodded, his mind already strategizing. "Then we fight. Lay out the treatment plan, Emily. I want to start immediately." Alexander returned home, determined to share the news with his family. However, Elizabeth was more concerned about their planned vacation to the Maldives than his health. "But what about the Maldives? I've already told everyone we're going," she complained, closing her laptop. Alexander stared at her, really seeing her for the first time in years. The beautiful face that had captivated him 2 decades ago now seemed like a mask hiding something cold and foreign beneath. "Really, Elizabeth? I have cancer, and you're worried about a vacation," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. Elizabeth snapped back. "Of course I heard you, but surely the treatment can wait a few weeks. We've been planning this trip for months." Alexander realized that his wife was more interested in designer bags and social events than his well-being. He poured himself a glass of scotch and called his friend Michael Davis, the only person he knew would understand. Michael arrived at Alexander's home office, taking one look at his friend's face and the untouched scotch on the desk. "What's wrong, Alex?" he asked, concern etched on his face. Alexander told him everything: the diagnosis, Elizabeth's reaction, and his feelings of betrayal. Michael listened intently, offering his unwavering support. "We'll get through this together, Alex. You're not alone in this fight," he assured him. As Alexander's chemotherapy ravaged his body, he began to notice Elizabeth's growing boldness with her affair. One morning, he saw Elizabeth's car pull into the driveway. She wasn't alone. Richard Thompson, a business associate Alexander had worked with on several projects, cut out of the passenger side. Alexander watched as Richard leaned across the car and kissed his wife, their embrace lasting far too long for a casual goodbye. Alexander's hands gripped the windowsill, his suspicions confirmed. He had suspected something was wrong: the late nights, the distant behavior. Now he knew the truth. Elizabeth and Victoria visited Alexander in the hospital, but their concern was not for his health. "We need to talk about something important," Victoria said, her voice syrupy sweet. "The inheritance." Alexander looked at them, really seeing them for the first time. "That's why you're here. To discuss what you'll get when I die?" he asked, his voice flat. Elizabeth perched on the edge of a chair, careful not to touch anything. "We're just trying to be practical, Alexander. The doctors say—" Alexander interrupted her. "The doctors say a lot of things, Elizabeth. But what exactly do you want?" Victoria spoke up, her voice cold. "We know about your will, Dad. We want to make sure everything is in order." Alexander realized that his family was more interested in his money than his survival. He made a decision then and there. He would not let them win. Alexander returned home to find Elizabeth and Victoria had redecorated in his absence, as if preparing for his funeral. He met with Dr. Emily Hart, the only person besides Michael he still trusted. "I want to make you the beneficiary of my estate," he told her, his voice firm. Dr. Hart looked up from the documents, her expression concerned. "Alexander, are you sure about this?" she asked. Alexander nodded. "You're the only one who has shown any real care for my survival. You deserve it." Alexander then called Michael, his voice steady. "It's time," he said. "Let's begin." Alexander sat in his home office, reviewing the divorce papers his lawyers had prepared. His signature, precise and firm, would end 25 years of marriage. He picked up his phone and dialed Michael's number. "I want you to deliver the divorce papers to Elizabeth personally," he instructed. Michael arrived at Alexander's home, the divorce papers in hand. "Jesus, Alex, you're leaving her nothing," he said, examining the documents. Alexander's voice held no emotion. "She'll get exactly what she deserves." Alexander watched through security cameras as Michael delivered the divorce papers to Elizabeth. She burst into his office hours later, papers clutched in her manicured hands. "What is this?" she demanded. Alexander leaned back in his chair, his expression impassive. "Divorce papers. I assumed you could read." Elizabeth's face contorted with anger. "You can't do this. You can't leave me nothing." Alexander's voice was cold. "I'm leaving you exactly what you brought to this marriage. Nothing." Richard and Elizabeth, desperate and in debt, attempted to kidnap Alexander for ransom. They lured him to an abandoned warehouse, tying him to a chair. "You should have just died quietly, Alex," Elizabeth spat, her voice laced with venom. Alexander looked at her, his expression unyielding. "You thought I was weak, the dying husband you could manipulate and discard. Instead, I took everything from you." Michael, who had been tracking Alexander's movements, burst into the warehouse with a team of armed security guards. "It's over," he announced, his voice firm. Richard and Elizabeth were arrested, their desperate plan foiled. Alexander watched as they were led away, a sense of satisfaction coursing through him. Alexander recovered from cancer and built a stronger empire. He married Isabella, his former assistant, and they had 2 sons. Elizabeth and Victoria faced the consequences of their actions, while Alexander ensured his legacy of loyalty, strength, and justice. He stood at the window of his penthouse office, looking out at the city he now dominated completely. At 65, his hair had turned silver, but his presence remained commanding. The past decade had seen his real estate empire grow stronger, built on the lessons of betrayal and survival. Alexander had learned that revenge properly executed wasn't about hatred. It was about justice, about consequences, about teaching lasting lessons. His former family had taught him about betrayal, and in return he had taught them about power.